Hi everyone, this video is for the Expressive Self-Portrait project. So this video is going to have a longer section in the beginning where I filmed myself as I created the outline for the drawing. So you can see me drawing in real time, and I'll be talking about the decisions I was making as I go. So what you're going to see is that first I'm starting with thinking of the simple shapes that the head is made up of. So we're thinking of that sphere, the jaw kind of acts like both almost cone-like, also rectangular-like, right? So I'm thinking of those simple shapes, mapping that out first. Then I'm mapping out the major features, getting the proportions in there, thinking of that figure drawing text we looked at. And then as I start to place everything, I'm going in and checking those angles, just like we did at the beginning of the semester, running plumb lines, and measuring things. Now, your drawing doesn't have to be exactly like your photo reference. You can make it expressive, but you want to be intentional about the things, for example, that you're choosing to exaggerate. So you still want to be checking, running those plumb lines, checking where things line up with each other. So an essential one could be looking at that eye, seeing where other parts of the face line up with it. So you still want to be doing that. You want to have that awareness. Okay, there's also going to be a time lapse in this video, so you can see my entire process, and I'll be doing some narration over that. And there's going to be a separate video where I go over some basic pastel techniques and also some basic color theory, so you can get a sense of how to set up your own drawings.
Before you start your drawing, you need a clear photo reference to work from. Here's an example of my photo reference where I have lit myself from the side. This lighting scenario gives me distinctive shadow shapes to work with that will make it much easier for my drawing to have dimension and form. Keep in mind that this is a photo reference for a drawing, not just a photo of yourself that you like. Look for distinctive shadow shapes in your photo. If you can't easily identify them, take another photo. Light yourself from the side. Avoid purely overhead lighting. Create thumbnails from your references to find a composition that you like. I created 3 thumbnails, and the third composition is the one that I chose. Don't just settle for that first idea.
Alright everyone, I'm going to start this portrait demo. Now ultimately this will be a pastel portrait. We're going to start off on these drawings using Vine charcoal. We're using Vine because it's so easy to use and to erase. So we'll use that to lay in our drawing, lay in a basic value statement. We'll go over parts of the drawing that you really want to keep, so the sort of lines that you want to keep with compressed charcoal. And then when it comes to putting in the shadows, the color, that will obviously be happening in the chalk pastels. So let's begin. So first I have my thumbnail. I have the thumbnail that I have chosen, and I have that right by my paper, so I can use that to reference. And then I also have my photo reference out. Now, as I'm drawing, I also have a barbecue skewer, which I'm going to use to draw plumb lines, going both vertically and horizontally, as a reference for my, to check where different things line up on my photo reference. Now, if you don't have a barbecue skewer, that's fine. You could also use a pencil, but you do want to be actively checking, especially with portraiture, what parts of the face are lining up with each other, what are those angles. So check those lines, check those angles, and be doing that throughout the entire process. Okay, so starting with the Vine charcoal, first I'm going to give myself some little guide marks for where I want this composition to basically go. So I'm looking at my thumbnail, I'm looking at where the sort of edges of things are, and I want to be following that basic composition. Now I might kind of go outside or inside of these lines, but I want it as a basic roadmap. So I'm going for the same big idea. Okay, so give yourself those little guidelines. All right, now we're going to be thinking of drawing the internal structures, and we're going to think of the simple shapes. So we're not starting with big detail or exact details like eyes. Rather, I'm going to start by thinking of the basic shapes that exist within the portrait, so within the head. So I'm starting with a sphere, okay, then I'm attaching a jaw shape, which is sort of cone-like, sort of rectangular-like. It's a hybrid shape. Okay, so I'm not starting even by looking at trying to get that exact contour. Instead, I'm thinking of those big internal structures. Okay, so I'm mapping in, so let's see, head is acting like a sphere. We have parts here that are acting sort of rectangular, parts that are coming to an angle, more like a cone, a bit. Now the neck obviously can act like a cylinder in some spots. You can also start to think of the bones that exist there. So you have spine obviously running through the neck, the collarbones coming out. So that is going to lead to particular shapes. So as you're looking, as you're drawing your portraits, you want to think of the structures underneath that are causing the head and the body to look that way, right? So when you go to draw a nose, you can think of those structures that are underneath. When you go to draw, the collarbones, the sort of shoulder area, you can think of the collarbones. You can think of the bones in the arms, the shoulders. Okay? All right, so I'll put that off. I'm going to map in the hair really generally. I'm not going to put anything too invested in here yet because this might be moving around a bit. I still need to map in the major parts of the face. So I'm not getting too committed, and that's also why I'm using the fine charcoal. It's something I can easily get rid of, even just with a sort of swipe of my hand. I can get rid of a lot of it there. But I could definitely go in with my kneaded eraser or larger eraser, get rid of that, or my chamois. Okay, so we got our sphere. Now I'm going to think of the center line of the head. So if you drew a line going down right through the middle of the head. Now in the photo I'm working from, my head is rotating a little bit, right? It's a kind of 3/4 view. So that center line is actually going to be kind of coming down through here, okay? So now I'm going to start to map out major proportions. So let's get that kind of brow line area, and there's also, if I'm taking my barbecue skewer, I can check the angle of my features. There's going to be a slight tilt. So it's not just going to be straight, that's something that you want to check. Is the head tilting back in space at all? Well, that's going to affect everything on the face. So you need to be checking those angles. So that's tipping, which also means that the nose is going to be tipping a bit. So I'm putting in that general. The nose might be, the mouth, the chin's going to be about right there, okay? And then the eyes are going to be in here. All right, so I'm going to get this keystone shape in here. So the brows turning into the nose bridge. Okay, and so with each feature, you're also thinking, what simple shape is this acting like? Well, parts of the nose have sections that almost act like the side plane of a cube, right? So it's kind of rectangular in some parts, and obviously other parts get more sphere-like. So it's not always going to be just one shape. It might even be a kind of hybrid shape, right? But you're always kind of asking yourself, referring back to, what are those simple shapes that I know and how light affects them, and how can I break this down into simple shapes? Okie dokie. So getting that nose in there. I'm also going to start to check now where different features line up with each other. Okay. And I'm trying to get the basic proportions. If I'm not exactly right, that's okay. You're using a photo reference. You don't have to be trying to copy the photo exactly. You want to be making an interesting drawing, okay? That's always the goal. You're working as an artist in a drawing medium right now. You want to be making an interesting drawing. So you can definitely keep your proportions in mind, but you can also be expressive. So if it's not completely exact, but it's an interesting drawing, then great. Okay? Alright, obviously the eyes are going to be acting like a sphere. Okay, and I'm also not getting super defined in the eyes yet, because maybe that will move around a little bit. I kind of need to place everything, see how it is, check my measurements, check my angles, check what things line up with each other, and then I'll see if I need to move anything around. Okay. Alright, getting the mouth in there. And then part of this chin is almost a little sphere-like. I'm also going to go in real quick and I'm going to check where parts of the chin, I'm running a plumb line, I'm checking where other parts of the chin line up with the face. So, this side of the chin comes over. Let's start to get that other eye in there. Now this eye is kind of tilting back in space a little bit more. I'm not seeing as much of it. I'm seeing more of this eye. So I want to keep that in mind. I'm going to be seeing more of that eye. And I'm also going to drag a line out here to make sure I am lining the eyes up. And again, you can think of the eyes as a sphere. You have the eyeball, which is sitting in the head, and then the eyelids are wrapping around it, and they give it kind of an almond-like shape. But it is a ball, it is a sphere. And you want to keep that in mind because it's going to help you draw more dimensionally, have more form to your drawings. Okay, as you're drawing as well, you want to pay attention to the shapes of the shadows that you're seeing. You want to pay attention to not just the features, but the area around features. So almost like the concept of negative space. You want to pay attention to not just the shape of the eye, but what is the shape behind the eye like? So the kind of socket area around it, right? So I'm noticing a shape kind of like that, and also that this needs a little bit more space in here. So you don't want to just check the major features, you also want to check the areas around them and be thinking of negative space. Okay, and as you can see, the my charcoal is smearing all around, which is okay, because I'm still sort of placing things. But once I'm getting a little bit farther along and I like where my drawing is at, that's when I'm going to go over thinly with a layer of compressed charcoal so this isn't smearing so much, so I can kind of save my drawing. Okay, let's get in, I'm going to carve in this side of the face. So this is another point where you can check the angles on the jaw, so check that in your reference. And you can also check where parts of the jaw line up with other features. So if I do that, I'm looking at my jawline, it's going to line up about right here, so it's pretty okay with that. Okay, that comes down. Alright, let's go up to here, check that side. And you want to be constantly checking your plumb lines because often you can be surprised by certain things. You know, there might be a part of the hairline that is farther back or closer in than you might expect. So run a plumb line for things and see where it lines up with other parts of the face. So check that in your reference. And again, it's not that you have to exactly try to replicate your reference and become a human copy machine. That's not the point of learning proportions. It's more so that you can make a drawing that's convincing, and once you get that point where it's convincing enough, then you can decide to keep going and make it hyper-realistic, or you can also decide to make it more expressive, and you can decide to deviate perhaps from your reference, and that's totally fine too. You just don't want the proportions to be to look distracting, right? You want to still be trying to get a likeness, trying to make that face make sense, but you don't have to get too overly obsessive. Okay. So placing iris, and I'm not gonna get into things like the pupils or the eyelashes yet, because I'm still really trying to gauge, okay, do I like where everything is at? I'm not getting too overly committed to different parts of this drawing yet, because I'm aware that parts might still be moving around. So in the beginning, we're working with those big general shapes, we're placing everything, we're checking our angles, we're checking our scale and our measurements. We're not getting too overly committed because we're working in kind of a general way and placing things. And then once you've placed everything, you like where everything's at, then you can start to, well, one, start to working your vine charcoal, so the drawing is saved. I'm also going to check the neck where that lines up with other parts of the face. That's going to be about right there. Okay. But yeah, you want to place everything first, and then you can start to get more detailed. And you even want to place everything, and then if you can, back way up and see what it looks like from a distance. That's going to help you read your work as well. Because sometimes you're working really up close, and everything looks like it's going fine. Then you back away and you realize there's some crazy distortion that was happening and you couldn't see it because you're too close to your paper. So that's always something that you want to take a moment to pause and back away from your work. See how it's looking. Okay. Alrighty. Just going to take out a few lines that I don't really need anymore, so I can start to get rid of that center line. Okay, make sure I place the eyebrows. I'm going to put the kind of general shape in first. Alright. This could probably go back more, though. I don't know, I kind of like that shape, so we'll see. I might keep that. Okay, I'm going to go in and kind of generally place the hair. Okay. Alright guys, so this is a good moment for, once you've kind of put everything down, take a moment, back away from your drawings, see how it's looking. If you're liking the basic part of the drawing, you can start to go over parts of this with compressed charcoal. And then you can go in and establish a basic value statement, still with the vine. So you don't want to go super dark yet. What we're going to do is do a basic value statement with the vine charcoal. Then we'll start with the chalk pastels, layering in color, and then you can go on top of that again with more compressed charcoal if you want to carve out some darker areas or emphasize other areas with line. Okay, so so I am glad that I backed up because I could really see when I did back up that I've made the neck too thin. So I think it needs to come out a little bit more over in here. And also, part of that is I'm worried about covering up the camera. So I might be doing that right now, but it's for a good cause. It's for the cause of this drawing. Okay, so that neck needed to be a little bit thicker. Okay, so that's something you could tell by eye, and then you could also measure parts of the neck against other parts of the body. So right now I'm measuring the neck in my reference photo, and I'm seeing how that compares to another part of the face. So I was just comparing this for the cheek. It's about like that. Okay, so now that's better. I have the same proportion going on. Alrighty, so things are looking pretty good. Okay, now I'm just sort of looking back and forth. There's a little shadow that's going to be happening here, and that's going to describe this part of the mouth and the cheek. Okay, now I'm noticing something as I'm running another plumb line. So, yes, okay. The nose is too small. So, needs to come out more like to right here almost. Okay, so that is something that is nice to catch in the early stages of a drawing when you're working more loosely versus trying to correct that in later layers when you're working with a medium, so either the compressed charcoal or the vine charcoal, that is much harder to erase or to get rid of previous layers, right? So you want to try to make those corrections as you're beginning in the vine charcoal. And it just can take a while, right? So you have to place everything, take a moment, look at it, check your measurements. Nose is more up to there. Okay. And there isn't, so you have to start to train yourself to sort of see the simple shapes in the face. You can memorize the proportions of the face, but then also keep in mind you have to really be actively observing whoever it is that you're drawing, because they might have slightly different proportions than those ones that you've memorized, right? That can be part of capturing likeness, is capturing the subtle ways that people are different. So you have to really start to see the simple shapes, the major forms in the face, describe those, and then be actively observing. And that's kind of the key to drawing and painting portraits. There's not really a single trick, right? There's not just one sort of easy way of doing it. You more have to learn this way of seeing. Actively seeing. Okay, so I am liking the major parts of my drawing. I'm going to start to lightly go over parts of the contour, and then I'm going to describe the shadows. Which also brings me to an important point with the photo reference. Now I talked about this earlier in the video, but I want to reaffirm it. So when you're going to make a drawing, you want to keep in mind you're making a drawing, right? It's not about the photo that you're using. So your photo should be serving the purpose of making a great drawing. And you can like photos that will not lead to great drawings. For example, photos that you take where there's tons of lighting, you've added a crazy Snapchat filter, probably not the best to try to make a drawing from, because you want a photo that is going to have some distinctive shadows to work with. So now I'm kind of going in and describing the shadow shape that will make my basic value statement. So the shadows, that balance of shadow and light is going to be what helps it look like it has form and 3 dimensions. If this was all just a wash and light, if I didn't have these shadows that I'm starting to map in, I would lose the feeling of form or those 3 dimensions. So keep that in mind when you're choosing a photo to work from, that you want an interesting lighting scenario, that you want to be able to easily identify those shadow shapes. If you're really searching for the shadows, they're not really there because everything's sort of front lit and just bleached out, that's not going to be a good photo for you to choose to work from. So please, please, please keep that in mind. That again is something to identify in the very beginning before you even start drawing. You don't want to get 75% into a drawing and then sort of go, oh, I can't really see the form very well. That's because I'm trying to invent lighting from a photo reference that isn't very good. Okay, so catch that in the beginning stages. Alright, so now I'm going to start to go over parts with compressed charcoal. Not super dark, I just want to be able to save my drawing. The vine charcoal is kind of spreading all over the place. And now I could also, if I wanted to, describe things a little bit more exactly. So if this is still kind of basic, there might be a little bit of subtle variation in some of the shapes here. So I can start to do that in my compressed charcoal layer. Now, I don't want to be adding a ton of compressed charcoal down. I'm not going to be shading with the compressed charcoal right now. The reason for that is that the compressed charcoal is very intense, right? It has an intense tinting capacity. So if I go on top of that with the chalk pastel and I'm trying to add color, the compressed charcoal can kind of muddy the color. So I'm more kind of using it to get that contour line in there solid. The vine charcoal, however, doesn't have a very high tinting capacity. So when I go over that with the chalk pastels, it's not going to affect the color too much. It's not really something to worry about. Okay, and if you want, again, you can kind of get rid of some of that vine charcoal, so you're just in that compressed charcoal line. So at this point I'll probably transition to a time lapse so you can see this a little bit faster. I did want to go over kind of slowly though the beginning stages of the portrait and kind of mapping everything out. So now going over this with compressed charcoal, and then you'll see in subsequent layers how I begin to layer in chalk pastel to get all of that color, and also how I use the chalk pastel to establish both the shadows and the light.
Lightly trace the outline of your drawing in compressed charcoal so it doesn't smudge off. Map in a basic value statement using vine charcoal. This is mainly to serve as a guide for where your shadows will go. We're working with color now, but we are using the same approach we've used throughout the semester. Work from dark to light and from general to specific. My shadows are a combination of blue, brown, and purple. My light areas are a combination of yellow, red, brown, and white. In chalk pastel, you are building up layers. Place all of your major values and then begin working in greater detail. Build up the lights with more layers of chalk pastel. Use a variety of mark-making applications. You can blend the pastel with the chamois or even with your finger. You can make hatching marks, and you can also scumble. Keep squinting and checking your values as you go. Consider what color you would like for your background. I chose a bluish green to contrast with the red of my shirt. I also made the background go from dark to light. The dark side of the background is behind the light side of my face, creating contrast and emphasis. In the final stages of my drawing, I returned with the compressed charcoal. I hatched over areas of coarse shadow to make them pop more and darkened areas where I wanted more contrast. You can use your charcoal to create expressive marks. Do not blend the compressed charcoal with the pastel. It will create muddied colors.
Alright everyone, there's a few things I want to point out with the drawing that I've created and considerations for you as you start your own drawings. So first, we're working in color, but we want to make sure our value structure is still really clear. That's super important, both with drawings and paintings. So squint at your drawings. Can you clearly see the shadows? Can you identify those different parts of the shadow and light family that we've been talking about all semester? So the core shadow, occlusion shadows, reflected light, direct light, highlights. You should be able to point that out in your own drawings and see that, okay? So that's going to be really important. Another thing I want to point out that becomes really interesting as we layer in color. So the reflected light picks up the color of the thing that the light is bouncing off of. So let me explain that fully. So in this scenario, this portrait is being lit from the side, right? So the light's coming in and the light is hitting this red shirt, and that red shirt light is bouncing back up into here. So that light is picking up the red of the shirt and coming up into the shadow and making that reflected light red. So in this scenario, the reflected light is red. But if you, for example, are working from a photo reference of yourself and you're wearing a teal shirt like this, the reflected light is going to go teal, okay? It's also why in sections I made the reflected light this kind of aqua blue. It's from the background. So when I'm showing the colors of the surrounding things in the reflected light, it makes everything feel like it's in the same sort of universe, right? If this reflected light was instead yellow or neon orange, it wouldn't really make sense with the drawing, and it wouldn't feel right when you're looking at it. Okay. Another thing, we're going to talk about color a little bit more in the pastel and color video, but I do want to point out one thing. So this red, it's a very warm red, it's a warm color, and I didn't use white to lighten it. Instead, I used orange. Now that makes it feel like it's still a red object. When you add white to red, it starts to feel really pink. And if you're not wearing a pink shirt, that might upset you if you end up getting that color. So instead, you can actually lighten reds with oranges or even yellows. Okay, let's just talk about, I'm going to talk about the colors I used really quick, and then we'll talk about the way you're applying the pastel. So I created the shadow using blue and brown and purple, and then I created the light sections using a combination of yellows, reds, brown, using the brown to kind of tone down those colors a little bit so they're not so intense and saturated. And then I also use, of course, white to create more of the light sections. Alright, and then finally, let's talk about the way you're applying the pastel. So you can think back to those different drawing techniques that we did with our value scales. So scumbling, getting that kind of foggy look, hatching, blending. My drawing is a combination of all those different things. There's parts where I blended it. I used my finger. You want to just make sure you don't have anything on your hands, so wash your hands before you do that. Or you can use your chamois or paper towel to blend parts out. There's also parts though where I've made a really deliberate stroke and left it. That can give the drawing an interesting expressive quality. Background is kind of scumbled, and then I also went on top and hatched with charcoal to bring out certain parts of the drawing more as well. So that's something you want to think about, is how you're applying the medium to the paper. Alright guys, have fun, and also check out the pastel techniques and color video.